Well, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Long Game podcast with an extremely disheveled and exhausted Ben Scallon and my co-host Jason Osborne. How are you today, Jason?
Funny you should say. I'm also extremely disheveled and exhausted. I do feel like our two, we can't quite say two under two anymore because one of them is two in a couple of months or whatever. But he and his sister, who's just 3 months old, are getting the best of us. So I feel like I'm just getting by these days. But I suppose that's better than could be hoped for.
Yeah, it's funny how your IQ just suffers. You start walking around and you make mistakes that if somebody else did it, you'd think this guy's a complete moron, and you're the one behind it. Just because you've got that sleep
Ah.
deprivation, that constant exhaustion, that you're literally like you feel like the village idiot.
Like, I mean, I know it's a long-standing joke in sort of like, parenting culture, if you want to put it that way, that, sleep deprivation is a form of torture and things like this. But like, it is a joke. My wife and I have probably been getting a broken 4 hours sleep a night for a couple of weeks at this stage. It's crazy. So I do feel like, yeah, as you say, I feel like my IQ has been sort of slashed in half. I spend most of my free time doing that primitive activity, which is to say nothing. I was sitting there in the armchair the other evening, holding my daughter, and I just fell asleep. And I was like, God, is this how I spend my like free hour in the evening now? Literally falling asleep in an armchair. Uh, but we would say that it's a good insight into life being about more than um, how would you put it in a consumer friendly way, about more than the frivolous, to put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I start to understand why. I don't know if you had this experience or our viewers are identify with this, but my dad would constantly fall asleep in the middle of movies whenever I was growing up, and that always used to perplex me. And now I am the dad. I could not get through a movie now under any circumstances without snoring by the midway point. But with that said, moving to the topics
Oh.
of the day. One of the subjects that I wanted to touch on with you. I'm not sure if you have many thoughts on this, but I was quite interested in it. That the Belfast rap group Kneecap, who are a group of Irish language rappers, they do a bit Gaeilge, they do a bit in English. They're very left wing and explicitly political. They'd be sort of Sinn Féin adjacent. A lot of their stuff is about Palestine and different left wing issues, immigration, pushing back on the immigration skeptical view, shall we say. So,
Mm.
everybody knows who these guys are. They're risen to prominence in the last couple of years. So, I'm not telling you anything you're not already familiar with. But as many people will have seen, one of the members of this group has been charged with an alleged terror offence in the UK. The Met Police were saying that they believe this individual tacitly expressed support for Hezbollah, which is a terrorist organization. I believe he was holding a flag or something on stage, which seemed to indicate that he had some sort of sympathy with that group, at least in the opinion of the people who are accusing him. And so he's going to be, going forward with a legal threat in that regard. So I mean, obviously we have to preface this by saying nobody's been convicted of anything. This is all an allegation. The legal process will play itself out. But I thought it was really interesting, and I wanted to talk to you about it because these guys have been embroiled in
Mm.
quite a bit of controversy recently over some very edgy statements, if you want to put it that way, that they've made recently, where there are clips which they say are taken out of context. They say that it's not actually their intent and not what they believe, but clips that appear to show them, at least, saying things on stage like, the only good Tory is a dead Tory, kill your local MP, and seeming to, at least, I don't know, what would you say, have an ambiguous view of groups like Hezbollah, things like that, which, has obviously led to a lot of
Mm.
controversy. I think a couple of their gigs got cancelled. And this is a huge concerned for them because obviously on one hand you don't want to be convicted of something like that because it's a relatively serious thing to be convicted of, but also on a more logistical
Yeah.
level, you won't be able to tour in the US because you'd be on a no-fly list. You can't get on a plane. Suddenly, that whole income stream dries up. So this is very dangerous for your career if you're a musician. And I thought it was kind of mad, given that obviously, these are not guys that I would see eye to eye with politically on a whole lot of stuff. They actually have me blocked on Twitter, even though I've never said a bad word about them. I actually kind of like them, so that I don't know where that came from, but anyway, regardless, that sort of tells you
You're,
there's
you're
not.
not gonna meet them anyway.
No, no, I don't. I don't think we're going to be the best of pals. But with that said, I do find it kind of odd that I think when you've got a group of rappers, young rappers who are on stage saying a bunch of edgy stuff in front of a crowd of thousands of people, I wouldn't necessarily take that as a dead serious political manifesto or something that they believe wholeheartedly. To me, it seems more like edgy Ozzy Osbourne mad lad stuff that is meant for shock value. I don't know that that's something that we need to drag an artist through the courts for necessarily, even an artist that would probably not give they probably would not be nearly as charitable with us as we are or as I am being right now, but still I think that on principle the whole thing seems a little bit ridiculous in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm in kind of two minds about it. I mean, and I suppose that's no surprise because you're dealing here with a question that has been uh, asked for at the very least hundreds, probably thousands of years about the limits of art and what you're allowed to do with it. I mean, it's certainly what they're doing is extraordinarily provocative. I mean, as you say, it doesn't even matter, a lot of this came around because of the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. It doesn't particularly matter what view you take of that conflict in order to sort of try and figure this out because as you said there's been clips circulated where they said things that seem extraordinarily questionable. As you say, they might say that it was taken out of context or whatever about it was a kill your MP and things like this. Not quite sure how that could be taken out of context, and I'm not sure what context you could add that would make that sound okay to put it that way. But
Yeah,
anyway,
I would actually dearly
like
love to know what the context was, but I mean that's that's neither here nor there, I suppose.
But I feel like you even look back through the 20th century, like musicians, artists are always being extraordinarily provocative and pushing the bounds of what you are and aren't allowed to say. You did have a wider question as to whether, yeah, that should be allowed as a society. I mean, clearly, the British authorities in this instance have come down on the side of, it's not allowed, and they would probably argue, indeed, I think they were doing so in they posted about this development to say that how I can't remember exactly how they phrased it, but essentially it was something along the lines of that it's a political prosecution is their view. They believe that obviously they're being silenced because of their stance on Gaza. Um, but it's I suppose no surprise it will come along at this time when tensions are continue to be so high around this topic, like and particularly in the UK where they've kind of died down now a little bit it seems to me. But you had these marches that were attracting tens of thousands of people through the streets of London. So like it's still very very intense stuff. But I suppose to get back to Kneecap, I'm kind of in two minds about it. I haven't figured it out because I do have some sympathy for art. Not that I obviously endorse and I think they had also said something about that flag being thrown up on stage. Like they didn't bring it, they didn't, intend to be making a statement. It was more so a reaction in the heat of the moment or something like this. But I not that you would be endorsing what they did, but as I say, arts and musicians have always played this kind of role of provocateur. Kneecap aren't new; they're just sort of the latest to find themselves in the limelight because of it. So there's that on the one hand. Then on the other hand, I mean, I can also see the sort of more traditional, common sense view that, yeah, particularly when it comes to say terrorism or esteeming things associated with terrorism, you want to nip that in the bud as quickly as possible. But I mean,
Allegedly.
I think a lot of Alleged, well, yeah, well, exactly. I was speaking theoretically in this regard, but when as it applies to Kneecap, then yeah, allegedly. But I suppose their argument then would be, and indeed not just their argument, but many people would be that Israel is doing, in the perception is that it's doing terrible things in Gaza, and that's just being given a sort of free pass, I suppose. So again. Yeah, I haven't really made up my mind on this one in the same way that I honestly haven't made up my mind about the conflict in the Middle East. I mean, we rarely talk about foreign affairs on this, and I think the reason for this, if people find that unusual, is because it's one area in which, like, you and I are both very much enmeshed with our lives, with our work, with our families. I feel like a lot of these international issues are sort of virtue sinks in some ways, no matter which conflict it happens to be, whether it's between Russia and Ukraine, which I find all of these conflicts intensely interesting. But when you ask me to sort of plant my flag on one of them, um, I just I don't have the time to be looking into these conflicts in the same way that someone working in them or an expert might be. I don't particularly, because of that, I don't feel particularly passionate about, throwing my whole moral weight behind one of them. So it's all just to say that, we rarely address these things on here. And as such, when it comes into sort of the kneecap thing, I don't have a particular, feeling in either direction. It's not, I suppose sometimes people might accuse you of sitting on the fence, but it's like, okay, well then I sit on the fence about a whole load of issues that I just haven't thought sufficiently about or that I don't feel strongly enough about. Like, what do you want from me? But yeah, suffice to say, I haven't made up my mind on this one. I think you might be a bit more in the sort of pro kneecap group on this particular issue, to put it that way.
Um, yeah, I think maybe saying pro kneecap would be a bit too far, but I thought it was. I think it's a little bit ridiculous for police to be chasing down edgy things that were said at concerts. I just feel like if you're in a country like the UK, which has many very serious actual threats to deal with, I can't imagine that kneecap is at the top of that list. Whatever you want to say about them, I will say on a less political point, on more of just a kind of an observation of the people's careers. I find that controversy and shock value is a really great way to have your career expand very, very quickly and then implode and crash and burn disastrously. And you find people who
Mm.
rise to prominence based on shock value are using that as like one of the main waves that they drive, to get to where they are. They do accelerate very quickly and they gain headlines and they gain popularity and they gain attention. Come back and check on that guy in 5, 10 years and he's nowhere, because his career just went off the rails. Like somebody,
Yeah.
I mean, this is a crazy one to reference, but just off the top of my head, he's the first one that came to mind. That rapper Takashi 69, it was his hair is rainbow colored.
Oh yeah.
For people who aren't into like rap or who aren't familiar with this guy, like his face is covered in completely idiotic tattoos. Like he literally looks like a clown. Like that's not even an insult to him. It's just an observation. And like he got really popular because he was coming out with bravado. Like Chicago is known for being one of the most dangerous cities in the world, and there's a place in Chicago called O Block, which is like a kill zone. Basically, you go there if you have a death wish. It's so dangerous, and a lot of guys from there were insulting him. So he showed up there in the middle of the night, and he said, I'm here now. Where are you? You guys were all threatening me. And then he got out of there before anything could happen. Like he showed up there at like 4 a.m. or something. So he got out safe. It was really just a publicity stunt, but threatening dangerous people and doing this and doing that and all this crazy wild stuff that gets loads of drama and headlines. And he was very, very popular. And now his career is like down and out and he's, totally broke and has nowhere to go. So, yeah, anyway, the point being, that's just one example of like a million where you see controversy catching up to people in a way that really does not
Well,
make the
I,
short term gains worth it at all.
I think it's also, playing the provocateur is also a young person's game. Like it kind of fits the sort of the image of the rebellious youth. But I don't know what age Takeshi was. It Takeshi 69? Yeah, it's funny as you mentioned. I realized that's a name I haven't seen in ages. So he's clearly fallen off. Well, I suppose you could argue if he was ever on. I mean, I wasn't a particular fan of his music, but with regards to Kneecap, yeah, they very much have sort of decided to carve out that space for themselves as, yeah, the edgy, yeah, just to use the word again because it sort of is what they are, provocateurs, and it's like that works while you're young, but it's like, does it keep working as you get older and older, and as sort of a, because it's the nature of things. Like you and I are, well, I'm 20, can't even remember my own age now. I'm so sleep deprived. 29, you're 28 if I recall correctly,
I'm pretty Devon.
27 possibly. Yeah, and yeah, I know if I couldn't even remember my own age, it was always going to be a bit of a demand to remember yours as well. But like I feel like I'm out of the loop when it comes to, what drives young people a little bit. Now, my own personal circumstances also bring that about, but that happens to everyone to varying degrees, and it'll be the same for Kneecap as well. So I do think that deciding that this is your thing at some point it works against you. You don't really have the same sort of, you can't fall back on class or sort of timelessness in the way that another artist might who didn't try to, corner the market in this way. So I don't know if it's the wisest marketing strategy. I mean, again, I remember a priest that I'm very fond of tweeting about how like youth is a good time, even if you disagree with what they're being activistic about, it's sort of the proper time for activism because it's sort of they've got all this passion and that's a very sort of a, yeah, fiery time of life. And indeed, for them, they seem perfectly willing to burn bridges over their stance in in relation to this conflict in the Middle East. So they may well say that it's worth it, but at least on the sort of longevity metric, yeah, I don't know how it'll work out for them.
Like, I don't see them being huge in 10 years. Maybe I'll eat my words. Maybe I'll be totally proven wrong, but I don't think we'll be talking about Kneecap
Mm,
as like like U2 or something like that, that they're going to be in the pantheon of great Irish. I think the way they're going
mm,
sort of limits their shelf life by necessity. Um, but with that said, I figured we might move on to something else
mm.
which might be about to reach its expiration date, and that is the Asylum. I don't want to call it a racket. That's the wrong word. What would you say? The Asylum teat. That's a great.
Gravy train, as it's.
Yes, yeah. Either of those works. Pick your poison as to what way you want to go with that, because as we know, and as our colleague Matt Tracy has reported on extensively, and many other people, of
Yeah.
course, Nick Delahanty has done a lot of work on this as well. Great reporting in terms of the uh, absolutely unfathomable amounts of money that have been made by people who sign IPAS contracts with the government. If you're a property owner and you say, "Hey, I'm going to put my hotel up as a asylum accommodation," you can make a fortune off of this, and many people have millions and millions, billions, really, of euros being spent over many years. So it's extremely lucrative, much more lucrative than what else you could use a business for. So if you've got a hotel, you could just run it as a hotel and take in tourists and so on, and you'll make a certain amount of money. It's actually a lot better for you to just sign a contract with the Department of Integration and make easy money that way. So this may all be coming to an unceremonious end in the relatively near future, because Sinn Féin, as I believe it's John Brady, their TD, who's the head of the Public Accounts Committee, they've announced that they're doing a formal hack investigation into the spending on IPAS to date and where the money is going, how it's being used, to what extent that's warranted, and so on and so forth. And I don't know about you, Jason, or what you think about this. I feel like this will be the fatal blow that kills the entire thing stone dead, simply because if there's one thing that drives Irish people psychotic, it's money being mismanaged by the state. Like, you saw the reaction to the bike shed, which really, in the
Yeah.
scheme of things, is not the biggest deal in the world. It's more what it represents. It's the fact that the state is
Mm,
so cavalier with the public's money that we spend weeks, months, you still hear it brought up now, months later, people talking about this 330 grand bike shed in Leinster House. So if the park starts looking into this and starts discovering all kinds of irregularities and problems, which it will, we all know it will, because this whole thing has been totally unregulated. It's been the Wild West. The amount of scandals that are going to be coming out on a daily basis are going to cause the entire thing to implode, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm not so optimistic as you. I feel like there's an unfortunate sense in which we have the state that we have, and the way that it likes to carry out accountability exercises is with as little accountability as possible. I mean, I was a bit maybe I'm a bit cynical or jaded this week because they launched was it this week? No, I mean it's Monday. So late last week on Friday, I think they launched the public consultation in relation to the COVID-19 inquiry. And I was reading a little bit around that, and the point they were making around that was that they don't want it to be an exercise in accusation. They don't want it to be a finger pointing game, as they'd been saying. They want it to be They want it to be a lessons learned kind of experience. And as such, it doesn't have any powers to compel witnesses or evidence. So, I mean, this is another topic that we could probably do at some point. I mean, this it's a joke of an inquiry as far as I'm concerned for how serious an episode the pandemic, or even more so the pandemic restrictions and response were for us. But that's all just to say that in relation to the Public Accounts Committee looking into IPAS spending, I don't have enormously high hopes. I mean, additionally, you think about the bike shed. I mean, I agree it was sort of in many ways one of the scandals of last year, or was it earlier this year? Gosh, so much happening so quickly. But I just feel like, yeah, there was a lot of talk and anger about that, but what changed? I mean, still no one has been held accountable for it. Still no one knows who signed off on it. It's just the government has sort of mastered the tactic of riding anger out. They sort of just circle the wagons, don't they become as opaque as possible, and then naturally anger subsides because it can only last for so long. Anger is a very scary thing from the public, but more often than not, it doesn't necessarily result in any change because it burns itself out. So anyway, I'm very happy to see this Public Accounts Committee is going to start looking into this spending, because I agree with you. I think a good place for them to start would be to get onto Gript and start reading, so the tireless work that our colleague Matt Tracy has been doing, because he, more than anyone, and it's going to be illustrated very nicely by, again, another one of our colleagues, Gary Kavanagh, who's done a lot of the sort of data legwork in the back end for visualizing this. The two of them have done an awful lot to build a picture of the web of investments and relationships between these companies and the people involved. So they've been doing this work with absolutely no reception from the mainstream. So, like, if they wanted somewhere to start, they could really just, start reading some of the work that Matt has been doing, because this is stuff that, as I say, the state has, it clearly hasn't been ignorant of it, because at some level it has to sign off on these contracts, but the sort of things that have just been allowed to slide, whereas if you're going to apply a bit of scrutiny to them, feel free to take a look. But I'm a little bit skeptical about seeing any change come from it. I think the best you could hope for, and this would be a great good, wouldn't necessarily be accountability for, say, the Wild West aspect of things so far, but it might be, sort of the end of the gravy train. I think that would be a really, really good thing to come from it, but I don't know if we're going to get that. How about you?
No, I think I'd be a little bit more hopeful that it actually will result in a tangible shift, because one of the effects I think it'll have is it will culturally make it much more acceptable to attack the immigration problem. Because obviously we all know that one of the reasons that a lot of people don't want to criticize immigration, especially if you're somebody like Sinn Féin, let's say, is you don't want to alienate left-wing voters who say, oh, immigration is great, and we need more mass immigration, and diversity is our strength, and you don't want to seem racist, like that. Those sorts of labels, the ists and the phobes and all the different kind of slur words that they
Mm.
throw at people, those have less power and traction than they used to, but they still have a bit of power. Like if you're a respectable middle class person, or you're I'm not saying only middle class people are respectable, by the way. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is if you're kind of like a person who is who thinks very highly of themselves, let's say. I'm trying to be
An
look,
upstanding
I'm
member of
just
the community.
exactly yeah, there's not we all know what I'm talking about here, all right? If you're from a posh area and you're in good standing with your fellow posh people, you don't necessarily want to come out and start criticizing immigration. I feel like this angle, criticizing it on the basis of the fact that there's huge wastage and the state is giving contracts to rich people to make them richer and so on, that's a nice, safe way to go about it that is not going to get you attacked by people because it's a perfectly reasonable complaint, not to say that the other complaints aren't reasonable, but it's more socially acceptable. So I
Yeah.
feel like if we have a whole media cycle where there's all of these massive stories coming out about outrageous government spending and dirty deals and contracts that were signed that shouldn't have been, and this guy cashed in and he was an unsavory character and blah, 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 the entirety of society will be given permission to attack the immigration issue without fear of backlash or repercussion.
No, that's a fair point, and I mean, we're also recording this at the interesting time that over the weekend, RT had put. I feel like this happens in stages. I mean, the fact that there's so much talk about this at all in Irish society is evidence of this, because for a while there was no conversation about it. It was really just, say, the Gript readers and, people who were sort of attuned to the fact that this was going on. But RT had an article over the weekend about how Ireland may lack robust asylum seeker checks over EU database exclusion. It's like that's been known for months and months, if not, I haven't checked the dates, but if not, years at this stage. But it was one of these things that couldn't really be said in polite society, whereas you have that appearing on RTE now. You also had RTE, who else was it? BreakingNews.ie, and there was one other one, but I can't remember it off the top of my head, reporting on sort of, yeah, I think if I remember correctly, it was some of the IGO cafe owner profits in relation to IPAS. So the fact that these things are appearing in the mainstream now indicates, yeah, I saw some people describing it as sort of a system update in the mainstream where whatever, sort of cynically saying that, a memo was passed around saying that it's okay to talk about these things now. But I understand why they would say that, because it very much appears that way. But I think the wider a space there is for conversation around this, just the better. And I think that's where the real good is going to come, because sort of similarly to the point you started with, it's always been a massive surprise to me that this doesn't have more bipartisan support, to put it that way, because there's so much wrong with it in so many ways. It's like, it's okay. It's the sort of insane demographic side of things, but it's also the fact that a handful of people, a large handful of people, admittedly, are enriching themselves off of an incredibly unregulated Wild West um, gold rush type event in a way. That's the sort of thing that the left traditionally would have been all over, you would think. Whereas, as sort of said at the beginning, out of a fear of the ists and the phobes, out of fear of being called, racist or xenophobic or whatever, they sort of just left this one untouched. Whereas, yeah, the more this makes its way into the mainstream, I think the less fear uh, people who aren't used to being tarred with a dirty brush are going to have about addressing it. And I think that's a good thing, because, I mean, that's why you and I are in it. It's not because, we don't have a particular like of this person or that person. It's because we think that there's wrong occurring here. And it's something that ought to be looked into. So I think any degree of scrutiny or greater conversation around it is something to be lauded. I just to add at the end, because I did see some people expressing cynicism about the fact that this was coming around now. They're like, oh, 5 years too late or whatever. And it's like, well, yeah, okay, it is 5 years too late, but better late than never. You have to work with what you have. And then if there's good work done in it, you also have to be gracious and sort of praise the good work that's done, because that's how you encourage more people to act well.
Yeah, I mean, it is worth pointing out, as I'm sure people are screaming at their screens right now and in the comments, which is absolutely true, that Sinn Féin stand everywhere and nowhere on the immigration issue. I mean, they were literally holding an immigration concerns public meeting with Matt Carthy a couple of days after they attended a counter demonstration to that protest in Dublin, where everybody was so they literally want to be all things to all people, and not in a good way. So yeah, I mean, there is that element as well, and you could point out that it's a little bit rich, but what can you do? That's politics, and that's politicians.
Mm.
On another note, speaking of our politicians, I figured I might get into this. In fact, maybe do you want to take this next topic about our wonderful artists, the
Oh,
land of saints, scholars, and artistically artistically endowed people?
artistically endowed. Yeah, so no, this is one that I think was reported on today about how, yeah, Minister for the Arts Patrick O'Donovan publicly backed the retention of this basic income for the arts scheme. I don't know if people remember this coming in a couple of years ago. I believe it was in 2022. It was introduced on a 3-year pilot basis, a 3 year sort of pilot time frame, and it provided 2,000 artists and creative arts workers who were selected randomly with €325 per week. So anyway, Minister O'Donovan has come out and said that, yeah, this is making a real difference. I'm reading from RT's reporting here. He said that its impact, this basic income for the arts scheme, its impact is far-ranging and affects all aspects of recipients' lives. Because this is coming around today, because they did a report into the yeah, sort of effects of this scheme now that the 3 years are coming up. And they were finding that, artists are feeling a lot less financial strain, their mental health is better. And it's like, well, no bloody wonder. Like, if I were being handed €325 a week to pursue my creative endeavors, I'd feel a lot better as well. But, you know, I very often I am very sensitive to optics, and I'm sensitive to how things sound. And I think one of the worst yeah, not that I care a lot of the time, because just manifests in my character, but I think one of the worst things you can be tarred as in the modern world is a sort of stuffy old conservative. But there is no way for this point not to sound like that, which is that this is just common sense. If your art isn't bringing you in income, you shouldn't be getting subsidized by the state for it. It's like, okay, the state might give you subsidy for a project or something if you have some particularly big and ambitious project that you can't fund by yourself, but not as your bloody income. Like, I mean, I really enjoy writing I write for a living, but I also enjoy writing in my spare time. Would I ever, I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror if I decided to quit my job here and apply for this scheme and start getting the €325, I think it is, so that I can just write full time. It's like, it's just so pretentious is one word, but it's just, there's something so entitled about it. Like,
Yeah, because I think you would agree and I would agree that arts are very important to a society, and that you would in no way want to live in a
100%.
society without the arts. I think artists fulfill a very important role, kind of coming back to our initial topic, although maybe they're a bad example. I don't know. But regardless, like on jokes aside, like all unironically, what they've done for the Irish language, Kneecap, is very significant, I think. So I don't want to sell them short on that.
Yeah.
But just in general, artists are very important. They're kind of like the soul of a nation. So we all accept that. But kind of like you, I would give a Darwinian view that survival of the fittest kind of needs to come into play here. And if your art doesn't take off, then it doesn't take off, and that's just the way it is. And let the cream of the crop naturally rise to the top. Let the people who are talented, people will respond to talented artists naturally of their own accord. They don't need to manufacture. Like Caravaggio was not Caravaggio because he was receiving state grants. I mean, he did have patronage. A lot of, like during the Renaissance, you would have a lord who would pay you for to commission artworks and
Yeah,
so on.
yeah.
That was a done thing, but it was because you had proven yourself to be of a certain standard. I don't think the mere fact that you're an artist, and I know they would say, oh, well, there's, we have criteria that people need to meet. I hate to say it. I've seen some of this art that receives state funding. I literally would not, I wouldn't take it for free, frankly. Like there was this one that stands out to me. And look, I'm sorry, I don't want to be mean. If the person behind it for some reason is watching this, I know you're out there, whoever you are. I don't want to say like you're a terrible person for this. I'm just saying I really didn't.
Pack it up.
Yeah, like I don't know, like Burger King is hiring. That's all I can say. Like there was one that I was covering in Dunleary a couple of years ago. It was climate change themed, and the way it worked was they had a light strip that went around this. I don't know what you call it. It's a kind of a tower on the coast, like a short little, almost like a mini fort. I don't know what the name for that is. I forget the exact word for it. There is a term, but anyway, regardless, it's a structure on the coast that was already there. The artist had nothing to do with that. That was just a pre-existing structure, and they put a glowing LED strip around it, and that's supposed to be the water level where the sea will be in 20 years time if we don't address climate change because of ice caps melting or something. And so it's supposed to demonstrate how high oh, look, you see, if your house is down the street, your house is going to be washed away and all this crap. And the arts minister was there. It was Catherine Martin at the time, and they did a big grand opening where they were like looking at this. It had received state funding, and I'm like, this is low effort propaganda, and you're just pushing a lazy state narrative with a colorful tube that you wrapped around a building, and I'm supposed to be impressed. Like, this is what my tax money is going towards, really. Like, this is not Taking of Christ. This is not the Mona Lisa. It's not something that I should be paying for.
No, I will go in stronger on this one. Contrary to what I said earlier about, or contrary to how I am in relation to, say, foreign conflicts that I don't feel I have any sway over, this is one that I do feel I can sort of come in swinging a stick in. Like, I don't think, we should be subsidizing some dumbass who, I don't know, is good at creative dance or something like this. Again, it's a matter of, yeah, don't be tarring people with a massive brush, but it's like, I don't know how you would receive this if you weren't generating some sort of, worthwhile output. I know where the state's desire to fund this comes from. It comes from this, inclusivity kick we've been on for the past decade or so, which is you've got a load of people who feel they're artistically inclined. And I mean, I can't help but think like a lot of these people haven't grown up. When I was in college, when I was in secondary, I harbored fantasies about myself that I was going to be the next great author, that I was going to be the next, like, I don't know, J.R.R. Tolkien or George R.R. Martin or whatever. And it got to a certain point where I had to face up to the fact that if I just sit at home and keep writing these little stories that I enjoy, number one, I'm never going to leave my parents' house. Number two, I'm never going to provide for my own family. And number three, I'm not really going to do any good work ultimately because I mean it's good work as a hobby, but it's not good work if that's taking up the vast majority of your time. And like the government again shouldn't be subsidizing that fantasy of yours. It's like we just have this allergy to reality in 2025, which is manifests itself in so many ways, whether it comes to gender ideology, when it comes to say I would say some people might say harshly, I would say abortion, given that we know the vast majority of abortions come about because people sort of just feel like it doesn't sort of suit where they're at in life, and it's like, well, if you decided to have sex, that's sort of the consequence of your actions. And I think it's sort of the same when it comes to the arts here. It's like, most people just aren't that good at art. That doesn't mean it can't be meaningful for you. That doesn't mean it can't be meaningful for the people in your life. What it probably does mean is that you can't make a living on it. And if you can't make a living on it, you shouldn't make a living on it at the taxpayer's expense. So this is one that I feel quite strongly about because I feel like it's connected to a lot of people refusing to let go of their dreams, yeah, at the taxpayer's expense. And the fact, as I say, when you look at the output of a lot of this, it's not particularly good either. It's not like the taxpayer is really getting anything back for it. So it doesn't necessarily contribute to the public good. So it's one scheme that, yeah, if I were given a Doge mandate or something like this, I'd be in and I'd be like, bye bye, basic income for artists. If you're the next Mozart or the next Picasso, you'll do just fine, but the rest of you, yeah, out and contribute to the full employment.
Because what's funny is I don't agree with the basic income scheme in general. I think it's just like a bad idea. It's just glorified social welfare basically.
Mm.
But in many ways, but I also think that if you were going to give it, there are certain things that have objective value that you can say a plumber's work is objectively worth about this much. You know, we can quantify it. We know the demand for it and so on and so forth. There is no way to say how much a piece of art is worth. I mean, we know that lots of great artists during their life were broke, including, I believe Rembrandt was a totally unknown bum during his life. Maybe I'm misremembering that, but I
Yeah.
believe that's the case. And then after he died, everybody discovered him and was like, "Hey, this guy's actually fantastic." But uh, yeah, in general, there's no accounting for taste, and how much people choose to value your work at is entirely a matter for the human race at large and not for any one institution or state.
Now, like, I don't want to say that, we should enforce hardship upon artists, but like, if you were to rescind this, you're not foisting upon artists anything that isn't being asked of everyone else in the country. Like, where's the sort of basic income scheme for journalists, for electricians, for, all of these other industries that don't receive this? And I think it's all the more important that artists be in touch with reality because, as you just said, a lot of the best art that thanks be to God we have came from people who sort of experienced the hard edge of life. Like, yeah, to go back to the example of Tolkien, Lord of the Rings in many ways for him was born out of his experience of the world wars. That was really difficult, and he sort of, dealt with some of that in the stories that he later wrote. The same with like Dostoevsky, who obviously wrote some of the greatest literature the world has ever seen. He by no means had an easy life, but it would have been easier if he'd had a basic income scheme. But would that have affected his work? Would that have affected his living situation such that he might not have been in touch with some of the human realities that he needed to be to write the things that he did? I'm inclined to say that it probably would have, not only because it, might have made him a bit more comfortable, but which I'm not necessarily opposed to making people more comfortable, but I think if there was ever a less needful bunch, it's possibly Ireland's artists at the moment. But
Well, speaking of World War II, if the state of Austria had had a basic income scheme for the arts, things might have worked out a lot better. So there is that element to it too.
yeah,
A lot of problems could have been averted if they just given him the few quid.
yeah, I was gonna say you could have just stuck to doing his shitty paintings, but to be honest, the paintings were actually pretty good. So like, who knows what problems the government is averting by paying this basic income.
All right, and with that said, everybody, we will catch you all next week on the Long Game podcast, and hopefully we will be back to our regularly scheduled program where you can enjoy our musings once again. So thank you all so much for listening, and God bless.